Hey, it's the belly here. I'm going to do the installation of the lower. So we started with our lower receiver. One of the key things that I like about this lower receiver is, believe it or not, this part actually came installed, the bolt catch. It's simple enough to install. All it takes, there's 4 different parts to it. There's the bolt catch spring, the bolt catch plunger that goes underneath, and then the bolt catch roll pin. What you do is you put a piece of tape here so you don't mar up or don't scratch up. Just put it on its end like that, line everything up, get that thing started, and then pound it through until it's flush. It's not going to come through all the way here, but as long as it's flush on this side, it should be fine. So yeah, that's simple enough about that, right? Okay, let's get our next part here. I like this. You can see I've got a little tray here. I've got it left over from a couple builds ago, but I really like it because it lays out the lower receiver parts, except for the trigger group and the general lower parts group. It lays it out very nicely. The next thing I'm going to install is the magazine catch, and this consists of 3 parts. Let me get this guy out here, sorry. The 3 parts are the catch, plunger, and spring. Now the whole point is put that part in there, turn it over, put the spring on there, and then get this started. Now the detent itself has 2 sides. It's got a side with knurling and a side without. I always put the side with knurling facing out. So that's the part that you grab onto. There's no real magic to this. Just put it on there and get it started. Once you get it started a couple turns, what you need to do is you need to push this, depress this side through, which, oops, there we go, which forces this end out, and then you actually tighten this. Now, the easy way to do this is I get a little plunger. Let me put one here. No, it needs to be bigger. There we go. So I just get a little plunger, and I hold it like this, secure that, and I sink that through all the way in as far as I can, and I tighten this down a couple turns. Here's how you can tell when it's generally flush. That's one reason. That's one way you can tell it's in there. The other way is, let me get a magazine here. The other way is that magazine goes in, it seats correctly, it pulls up the magazine catch, or the bolt catch, and when you hit the button, it drops free. Secure brings up the bolt catch, drops free. So now we know that's installed correctly. When you look in here, you notice it's not entirely flush right here. That doesn't concern me too much, but it's going to concern me enough right now that I'm going to pull it out one turn. There's a balancing act here of screwing in the magazine catch far enough that it can catch the magazine, but also not so far that when you hit the button, the magazine won't release freely. So there's that part installed. As you can see, the next piece we're going to install is the pivot pin, spring, and detent. So they fit in this portion right there. There's that spot right there. So all you do is you, let me put this in there, is you slide that spring in there. And then the detent goes in after it. It's not under a whole lot of pressure because it's not that stiff of a spring. But believe me when I say if you get a little squirrely with your springs, there we go. And it just sits in that little detent. There's a detent rail right there. Most of them also have a little push right there. So it's just, they're a little rough at first because it's a brand new detent. A little bit of oil. Grease that right up. Okay, there you go. Okay, the next piece we're gonna get installed is the trigger group. This one is a little bit involved, but it's well worth it in the end. Let me get a couple tools out that we're going to end up using. A couple of these. So you always install the trigger first. The trigger consists of the trigger with the trigger bar, trigger spring, disconnector spring, disconnector, and the pin. So you just slide this in there. You got to make sure that this the trigger spring goes in like that. What I do next is I'll take a punch and I'll line everything up like that. Now, what I do next is I get the actual trigger pin started. There. Now that it's started in there, you see it started in there. Now I'm going to place the disconnector in there. If need be, I flip it over, put some light in there so I can see what happens. Case in point, trigger pin fell out. There we go. Now it fit through. Now we are dealing with springs under pressure, so if you feel the need, go ahead and wear some eye protection, particularly for this next part. So what I'm going to do is get that out of the way. I don't need that anymore. And then we are again the way this goes is this thing flops around. You put this tension on the spring this way because you want the hammer to go like that. You can do a lot of things, but I recommend always using a full strength hammer spring, full strength all the way. There are a couple companies like JP Enterprises that make a half power or a reduced power. I don't use that. The possibility exists of the hammer not going forward with enough strength to actually ignite the ammunition. So, got our sacrificial pin in there, and then we just put our other pin following in right behind it. If you feel the need to use a hammer, you should need to use a hammer a little bit. Use a light hammer that doesn't have any marring surfaces on it. So plastic, rubber. Excellent. Now, the next piece we're going to install is going to be the safety with all of its assorted parts. Safety is actually held in by a spring and detent that are held on by the pistol grip. So if you have one that takes that, take it apart. So the next part we're going to install is actually the safety, and to do that we're going to also need to install the pistol grip. One thing to remember is that when there is no upper receiver, you do not drop the hammer on without something to buffer it. This is steel, this is aluminum. When one hits the other, generally goes well for not so well for the aluminum. One other thing to remember is that the only way to put your safety in there is with the hammer cocked. As it is right now, it won't make it past there. But if you cock the hammer back, that drops the trigger bar to where you can put the safety in there. Now, with the safety in there, on the right hand side of the weapon, or the side of the ejection port of the upper, there's a hole. Inside that hole fits the detent. Now it's the one that looks like a little bullet. It's got a flat side and a very curved side. That one goes in there, curved side towards it. And then the spring that comes with it, it looks a lot like the spring we used for this, used for the pivot pin, but it's a much stiffer. So we're going to use that just to kind of, and what we do is we push on that just to seat it, so you see right now the trigger doesn't come out. That's kind of important. Now on your pistol grip, there's a hole right here where that's going to sit in. So when we put this together, what I want to do is we want to make sure that it goes in there, that the spring goes in both of those holes and doesn't bind or kink or anything like that. You don't want kinky springs in there. That'd be bad. So once you push it in there, you can hold it in there and just verify that your safety is going to move properly. So we just give it a little kick, stop, perfect. Now, like for all the bolts and stuff, put blue Loctite on it. With the blue Loctite on there, all we have to do is put the two pieces together. There we go. And screw it down until it's firm. This is one where you should definitely test fit this screw, simply because by over tightening it you would strip out the threads on your lower receiver, seeing as that's the part that takes the background check and all that sort of stuff. It's probably best to test it first. I've already pre-fit this to make sure that these parts work. So there we go. Blue Loctite in there. Now we need to test our safety. The weapon is on safe. I block this so I can't do it. Hammer does not fall. Put it on fire. Hammer falls. Reset. Weapon back on safe. Hammer does not fall. Safety, pistol grip are installed. next piece we're going to install is the trigger guard. They have two sides to them. One has a little squeezy indent, the other side has a barrel hole. The squeezy indent goes towards the front. These are generally pretty easy to install. Just give it a little compression and it slides right in there. No biggie. The roll pin for the rear is a little more important. A lot more important. Number one, it stops it from flopping around like that. But the most important thing about this is that tiny little ear, called the ear, needs support. It's off the ground, so when you start pounding on it, the possibility exists that that'll break off. Again, a broken lower receiver means you got to buy a new one. So what I do is I just put a little piece of something underneath there. This punch seems to work very, very well. The trigger guard itself will support the lower when I put a little bit of pressure on it. Again, non-marring hammer. Give it a little tap. The best part about a non-marring hammer is that these heads are replaceable, so you don't have to worry about that. You see it's gone almost all the way through. Let's give it a couple more taps just to flush it up. It's flushed up and secure. There we go. Simple enough. It's got a little bit of a buffer there, a little bit upright, so let's take care of that. Grab another punch. There you go, flushed. A little bit of bronze marking on their side, but a little bit of bronze marking. If you use a plastic, a Delrin, or a deck of cards or something, that's fine. Since this is an old beater gun, just use what works. Put it underneath there. It's better to have a little mark than stressed out and not available. Our lower receiver is almost done. Final piece of installation is the lower receiver extension, the buffer catch pin, and the rear takedown pin retainer for pin, spring, and detent. The interesting thing about this is that this gets installed from the rear like this, boink, and it gets held in place by the receiver end plate. The castle nut is directional, so there are big cuts and there are little cuts. The little cuts go towards the rifle, big cuts go towards the back. I'll show you why. First things first, let's put some parts in here. So we put that in there, simple enough. Our next piece is the pin, and then the spring. You can see it's held almost all the way in there by that. There's not a lot of tension on that, but if you're squeamish about springs, this might be the time to put a towel over it. I've got a couple extra of these, so in case I need to drop one, if I send one flying across the room. The next part is the buffer retention pin and the buffer pin spring. They go in that little hole right there, just like that. Just drop them down in there. Good enough. Now, here's where things get a little bit dicey. You have to start turning this thing. Just keep this to the rear. Now, what you're aiming for is you're aiming for that point. Let's see if I can get light on it. Aiming for that point where the bottom edge of the receiver extension is just holding the retainer pin, so it's going to be sitting on that ledge right there. I think one more turn will do it. Yep, there it will. Well, you notice that the detent just kind of fell out there. So this is, we're just about now starting one of the trickiest parts of a lower receiver build. And that would be keeping the rear detent spring, the rear takedown pin, detent, and spring in there. So, a couple different ways to do it. This is the way I use. I line everything up. I put the pin in there. I put the detent in there. And then I kind of bend the spring in there to fit in there, like that. Next, since we've got the appropriate amount of tension on that guy, I'm going to hold it upright like this. And I'm just going to hold the receiver end plate down. Like that. Just like that. And then I screw this piece down. I screw the castle nut down by hand. Once it's screwed down by hand, we double check our work. Yep, it's held in correctly right there. And let's get our little, again, these pins and detents are going to be pretty difficult at first. Yep, it's held in there very nicely. There we go. So, the next thing to do is we need to torque down the castle nut. Got a castle nut wrench. All you do is turn it. The appropriate amount, the doctrinally correct amount, is 30 foot-pounds. But all I do is I just turn it, and then while it's on here, like this is absolutely not doctrinally correct usage of tools, of anything, so please don't beat me up about it. So just give it a schwack. Just give it a little hit like that. Make sure everything is still seated correctly. Excellent. And that's in there. Now, back to the reason I said, so these big pins are obviously meant to, these big holes are meant for a castle nut tool to fit on there. These small holes are meant so you can take a pin and you can stake the end plate into the receiver. Now, one of the things you can do, I haven't done it here, is you can put blue Loctite on the threads of this. Blue Loctite. Always use serviceable, service removable Loctite on these things. So like that. But because I may change this out later at a later date, what I'm going to end up doing is one of my favorite methods of all time, also known as just mark it like that. Just use a permanent marker, and I'll use it on both of them. That way, at a glance, I can tell whether it has moved or not. I'm sure later I'll torque it down correctly, but that's good enough for right now. Only last pieces are the spring, the buffer, buttstock itself. There you go. I'd like to thank the following folks for helping me with parts for the lower. I'd like to thank Irving for the trigger guard, and also, I don't know if I should thank him, but his sealed with a kiss note. Roses are red, here's your part. So there's proof that Irving wears makeup. Vigil for the disconnector, the trigger spring, the safety selector. Who is it? Guns Are Bad for the trigger and the springs. R Fizzle for the recoil spring. And to Hobo for the pretty much the entire, he sent me a complete PSA lower parts kit. The rest of the parts I either had on hand or have ordered. The total cost involved in this gun is just under $200. So I'm very grateful. I'm so extremely grateful that the community would come together and do something like this. So here you can see the entirety of the rifle. I'm going to break rules and kind of show you, give you a tour of the whole thing. Let me see if I can get this happening. A2 flash hider, melanited 1 and 7 twist, 5.56 NATO chamber barrel, LMT front sight, Centurion arms, handguard, Troy, gas block, carbine gas tube. I don't know who made the upper, but a PSA lower parts kit, Anderson arms lower receiver, GI trigger, LMT rear sight, Magpul grip. It's got a Spikes ST-T2 buffer with a carbine strength spring and Magpul Mo buttstock. Let me set this down.